Growing tomatoes is an excellent way of earning money, as tomatoes are widely used in human food. Rich in vitamins and minerals, tomatoes provide energy and vitality. At harvest, there are lots of tomatoes and they are sold at low prices. Fresh tomatoes rot quickly, which explains why they are not available throughout the year. However, tomatoes can be stored fresh and dried, as farmers from southern Mali show us in this video. If you want to store tomatoes, never mix healthy tomatoes with those infected by disease-causing germs, insect larvae and molds.
At harvest, some tomatoes are in good condition and others are not. So if you mix them, the bad ones will spoil the good ones. Healthy tomatoes can be stored in the fridge for a long time without spoiling. That's why we sort tomatoes.
Sort tomatoes to prevent contamination. Wash them with water to clean them. The first way of storing tomatoes is using a local fridge. A local fridge consists of 2 earthen pots placed one inside the other and separated with sand. By watering the sand, you create a refrigerant that keeps the items in the small pot fresh.
We use the earthen pot that is made here locally. There are people who know how to make it. It is not expensive. And above all, the pot keeps the freshness and doesn't alter the color of its content.
To make your own fridge, take a large pot with holes and place a small one without holes inside.
The reason we use a pot with holes is to allow water to drain after watering, so that it doesn't store in the pot.
To prevent sand from dropping through the holes while making the fridge, water the sand before using it, as it makes the sand more compact. Before adding the sand, cover the small pot with a lid to prevent the sand from getting into the small pot. Put some sand between the 2 pots to secure the small pot inside the large one. But make sure the level of sand does not reach the opening of the small pot, as the water can get into the small pot when watering. Put a piece of clean, wet cotton fabric inside the small pot. The size of the small pot depends on the amount of tomatoes to be stored. The cotton fabric prevents tomatoes from getting into contact with the wall of the pot. Put fresh tomatoes in the small pot in such a way that they stay wrapped in the wet fabric. Keep the pots in a room out of direct sunshine, as they may dry up if they are exposed to the sun. Some farmers make their fridge right in their house, as the fridge is heavy and difficult to transport if the pots are large. Water the sand between the two pots every morning and evening. The amount of water depends on the size of the two pots used. But while watering, be careful not to pour water inside the small pot, as this can cause tomatoes to rot.
We water the sand around the two pots, but we make sure it doesn't get inside the small pot. Water will soak into the sand as we add it. When we see water on the surface, it means it is enough.
Now that your local fridge is ready, your tomatoes can be used as needed for 15 days without spoiling. Open the small pot, take the amount of tomatoes you need, and close the pot back properly. If the pot is empty, you can add more healthy tomatoes.
Anafante saka foga ba nafa chama de bala ambe anga frigo soro danogola ante warbabo.
The fridge has many benefits. It is not expensive. If there are a lot of tomatoes and it is hard to sell them on the market, you can store them for consumption. You no longer need to buy tomatoes. Tomato consumption also helps reduce malnutrition, as tomato contains lots of nutrients.
Abe dobo fana na parce que tomate fana na fa ka bo adamade ka keneyala.
In addition to storing fresh tomatoes, they can also be dried and used anytime. Wash your fresh tomatoes well and put them in a clean container. Using a knife, cut each fresh tomato into 4 slices for easy drying. In a ventilated area, put a table or any other raised rack to prevent contact with the ground.
If we dry tomatoes off the ground, it is good. But if you do it on the ground, dust and insects can come in contact with the tomatoes, and this is bad for eating. That is why we spread tomatoes on a platform, and this also allows air to circulate.
Take a clean straw mat and spread it on the table or the rack. You can also use a wooden dryer, plastic bags, tarpaulins, or other materials for spreading the tomatoes. Spread the cut tomatoes on the mat or in the dryer. To prevent disease caused by dust and insects, take a clean transparent fabric and cover the tomatoes. By drying tomatoes out of the sun, you preserve nutrients and the color of the tomatoes.
Drying tomatoes in the shade has more benefits for consumption. Before we dried our tomatoes under the sun, but we have seen that drying in the shade is better. If they are dried under the sun, the color changes, while in the shade, the color stays.
The tomatoes will be well dried in 4 to 5 days. When the tomatoes wilt and the color becomes dark, this means they are well dried. Tomatoes are dry. When the water drains out, they shrink and the skin sticks to the flesh. That is how we know that the tomatoes are dried. Once dried, put the tomatoes in clean small plastic bags according to your requirements. Dried tomatoes can be stored for a year. Remember that fresh or dried tomatoes are rich in energy and vitamins. As tomatoes rot quickly, it is better to store them. To prevent contamination, never mix infected tomatoes with healthy ones. Store and wash the healthy tomatoes. You can store fresh tomatoes in a local fridge for a few weeks. Put a small pot with fresh tomatoes inside a big one with holes. Use some sand to separate the two pots. Water the sand twice a day to preserve freshness in the small pot. Drying is another way of storing tomatoes. Cut the tomatoes into 4 pieces and dry on a raised platform in the shade for 4 to 5 days. Cover with clean fabric to keep away from dust and insects. If storing fresh tomatoes is a concern for farmers, the use of a local fridge and drying them are some easy solutions.